The candles in Lady Pennington's ballroom wavered like 1,000 tiny suns, their light caught and scattered in the crystal drops of the chandeliers. Laughter floated above the strains of the orchestra, a bright, tinkling sound that seemed to skip past the row of chairs along the wall and die at the hem of Eleanor Whitford's gown. She sat where she always seemed to sit now, half hidden, on a chair slightly too close to the wall, where the shadows tried and failed to make her invisible. Her slate blue dress was tasteful, well cut, chosen because it flattered her figure without demanding attention. She had chosen it the way a soldier chose armor, something to withstand the evening, not to conquer it. "Did you hear?" a girl's voice whispered gleefully nearby, barely muffled by the flutter of a pale pink fan. "Lady Eleanor turned 30 last week." 30? The other girl's gasp was theatrical. "My mother says that at 31 ought to be minding grandchildren, not pretending to be part of the season." They both giggled. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her own fan, the tiny bones in her hand standing out against her glove. She kept her gaze on the dancers. The waltz was in full swing, skirts billowing, gentlemen's tails swishing in neat arcs. No one looked toward the chairs. Certainly no one looked toward her. "She had a broken engagement, did you know?" The first voice went on, brimming with relish. "Years ago, Mama says it left marks on her character. Perhaps that is why no one cares to risk it now," the second girl murmured. "Imagine being 30 and still waiting to be asked." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but her posture did not falter. She had learned long ago that dignity was sometimes nothing more than the ability to sit perfectly still while one bled inside. Across the room, her mother was laughing too loudly at something a portly gentleman had said. Lady Agnes Whitford's jewels sparkled bravely against a gown that had been altered once too often. Worry sat behind every flutter of her fan. The debts her late husband had left, the shrinking estate, the dwindling patience of creditors. Beneath it all lay the same silent plea: just one good match, just one daughter settled, just one rescue. The orchestra finished the waltz. Applause rippled politely and couples broke apart. Ladies fanned their flushed cheeks. Gentlemen sought refreshment or their next partner. Lady Pennington, buxom and beaming, swept through the crowd with the satisfied air of a general surveying a well-fought battle. When she spotted Eleanor, she altered course with the precision of long habit. "Lady Eleanor, my dear," she cooed, laying a jeweled hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Would you be so good as to keep an eye upon the younger girls? They cluster dreadfully near the dessert table, and cook will expire if the syllabubs are destroyed before the third set." The words were wrapped in politeness, the meaning nestled neatly beneath. "You are not required in the dance." "Of course, Lady Pennington," Eleanor replied, rising gracefully. Her smile was steady. Years of practice had made it so. "I shall make myself quite useful." Useful. The word lodged somewhere under her ribs as she crossed the room. Once she had been something else. At 19, she had been pretty, hopeful, engaged to a charming gentleman with laughing eyes and perfectly practiced compliments. Then had come whispers, a sudden letter breaking the engagement, accusations she had never fully understood. Too proud to beg for explanation, she had simply endured the slow cooling of invitations and the quiet closing of doors. Now at 30, she was useful, a chaperone in all but name. Near the refreshment table, a cluster of girls were indeed hovering, giggling over a pyramid of sugared fruits. Eleanor gently redirected them with a few well-chosen words. They obeyed her with the careless obedience one might grant an elder sister who had somehow failed at the very thing they believed inevitable, being chosen. A rustle swept through the room then, distinct even above the music. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Eleanor, against her better judgment, glanced as well. He had arrived. The Duke of Ashbourne stepped into the ballroom as if he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Not this house, perhaps, but the space, the attention, the air itself. Tall, immaculately dressed in black and ivory, he carried his power lightly, like a man accustomed to its weight. Dark hair, just a shade too unruly for perfect fashion, caught the candlelight. His eyes, from what Eleanor could see across the distance, were cool and watchful, missing very little. "Good heavens, he is even more handsome than the caricatures," breathed one of the girls near Eleanor. "And still unmarried," sighed another. "Imagine a duke." Eleanor turned away, arranging empty glasses on a nearby tray. It was not that she was immune to the sight of him. She simply refused to indulge in fantasies she had long ago locked away. Men like the Duke of Ashbourne did not dance with women like her, not unless it was a kindness or a dare. "Look there," a male voice said just behind her, low and amused. Poor Lady Eleanor, one would think she had grown roots in that corner. Roots or cobwebs, came the reply, followed by a chuckle. At 30, she ought to accept her fate and take up permanent residence among the chaperones. Their laughter pricked at her skin. She did not turn. The glasses clinked softly as she stacked them, an anchor in the storm of mortification. The orchestra began a new tune, the opening notes of another waltz curling into the air. Eleanor exhaled slowly. She could survive one more dance, then perhaps another. Then she would feign a headache, claim fatigue on her mother's behalf, and escape. She reached for another goblet. A shadow fell across the table. "Lady Eleanor," a deep voice said, close enough that she felt the vibration of it before the meaning. She stilled, hand hovering over the glass. Surely it was another jest, another cruel little amusement at her expense. The voice came again, quiet but unmistakably directed at her. "Lady Eleanor Whitford," he said, "will you dance with me?" For a heartbeat, Eleanor was certain she had misheard him. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, the rise and fall of the music. Surely the words had been swallowed by it all and reshaped into something she merely wished to hear. She turned slowly, prepared to find some smirking young buck amused at his own cruelty. Instead, she found the Duke of Ashbourne. He stood only a pace away, every line of his posture easy, yet unmistakably formal. Up close, he seemed even taller, the precision of his tailoring emphasizing broad shoulders and a lean frame. The candlelight caught in his dark hair and in the faint, almost imperceptible crease between his brows, as if he were braced for refusal. Eleanor's breath caught. Her hand remained hovering over the goblet, absurdly suspended, as though the slightest movement might shatter whatever strange illusion this was. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she managed, her voice low and even. "Did you speak to me?" His mouth quirked, the suggestion of a smile that did not quite reach his cool grey eyes. "I did," he said, "unless there is another Lady Eleanor Whitford standing by the wine-glasses." A flush crept up her neck. Behind her she heard the sharp inhale of one of the girls, a whispered, "He cannot be serious," half stifled by a fan. He extended his hand, gloved, steady. "The set has already begun, but I should like to claim it if you are willing." This was a jest, it must be, or some misguided act of pity, or worse, a dare, a wager among bored noblemen who had exhausted other amusements. Eleanor lifted her chin a fraction. "I would not wish to detain your grace from more suitable partners." His eyes flickered, just once, as if something in her words pricked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice enough that only she could hear. "Lady Eleanor, I have asked you," he said quietly, "because I wish to dance with you. Not with the wall, not with the glasses, with you. Will you refuse me and cause a scandal of an entirely different sort?" The corner of his mouth lifted again, but this time the humor was gentler, aimed at himself as much as at her. The room had gone oddly still, or perhaps it only felt that way because every nerve in her body was rigid with awareness. Faces were turned toward them openly now, fans frozen. Mid-air whispers like the rustle of silk. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Pride, old wounds, and a lifetime of being overlooked battled with something she had almost forgotten existed. The aching, human desire to be seen, just once, just for herself. Very carefully, Eleanor withdrew her hand from the neglected goblet and placed it in his. "If your grace insists," she said, surprised that her voice did not tremble, "I shall do my best not to disgrace you." "I rather think," he replied, leading her toward the center of the floor, "that it is I who will be under scrutiny." As they stepped into the waltz, a path seemed to open before them, the other couples shifting just enough to accommodate the improbable sight of the most eligible duke in London, dancing with the woman most had already consigned to the shadows. His hand settled at her waist, warm through the layers of silk and whalebone. The other held her own firmly, guiding her into the sweeping pattern of the dance. She had not waltzed so close to a man in years. For a moment she feared her feet had forgotten how, but her body remembered. Muscle and memory took over, and soon they were gliding across the polished floor, her skirt brushing his legs, his scent, clean linen and something faintly crisp, like winter air, wrapping around her senses. "You are very quiet." "Lady Eleanor," he observed, his gaze never leaving her face. "Most ladies would be chattering about the weather at least." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Most ladies have not heard themselves discussed as if they were a curiosity on a shelf all evening, Your Grace." A flicker of something, anger, darkened his expression. "Indeed," he said softly, "I heard enough, and I found it distasteful." She blinked. "You heard more than I would wish," he replied. "Less than I suspect you have endured." His words unsettled her more than the dance itself. "Pity," a cold voice whispered inside her. "He pities you." His conscience pricked, and he decided to throw a dance to the aging spinster. "I do not require your rescue, Your Grace," she said quietly, careful to keep her smile in place for the onlookers. "I have grown quite adept at surviving without it." He studied her, his hand tightening. infinitesimally at her waist as they turned. "Good," he said at last. "I have no interest in porcelain dolls to be wrapped in cotton and placed upon mantels. I prefer people who have survived." Her practiced poise faltered. The slightest misstep, a breath out of time, and his arm steadied her before anyone could notice. "Why me?" she asked, before she could stop herself. The question slipped out, raw and more vulnerable than anything she had allowed another person in years. "There are countless young, beautiful, unblemished girls here tonight. Why choose the one everyone mocks?" His gaze held hers so intently that the rest of the room blurred. "Because," he said slowly, "I do not believe everything everyone says, and because I prefer to make my own judgments." He paused, then added, so softly she almost missed it, "And because your name has crossed my path before, Lady Eleanor." A chill traced her spine. The music swelled around them, carrying them into another turn. Her fingers tightened in his. "My name," she repeated. "In what context, Your Grace?" He held her eyes, unreadable. "In a context," he said, "that I suspect you have every right to know." The waltz drew to its close, the final notes shimmering through the air. As applause fluttered around them, he bowed over her hand with impeccable grace. "May I call upon you tomorrow, Lady Eleanor?" the Duke of Ashbourne asked, his voice just loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. "There are matters on which I should like to speak with you privately." Her heart lurched, old ghosts stirring. Somewhere behind her, someone gasped outright. "Of course, Your Grace," she heard herself reply, even as her mind shouted for caution, because there was only one past matter she could imagine him referring to: her broken engagement. Sleep came to Eleanor in broken pieces that night, like shards of a shattered mirror. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ballroom again, the turning faces, the parted fans, the Duke of Ashbourne's hand extended toward her, as if she were someone worth choosing. By morning, the memory felt almost absurd. She sat before her dressing table, while her maid arranged her hair into its usual modest coil. The glass reflected a woman with dark circles under her eyes, a few faint lines at the corners where laughter had once lived. 30, she thought, studying herself. 30, and still foolish enough to let one waltz unsettle me. "Will you wear the lavender, my lady?" the maid ventured. "Your mother said there might be callers." "Callers?" Eleanor's mouth curved wryly. "You mean those who wish to be certain they truly saw what they think they saw last night?" The girl flushed, unable to deny it. Eleanor sighed. "Lavender, then," she said. "It gives the illusion of cheerfulness." Downstairs, she found her mother already installed in the drawing room, surrounded by a flurry of opened notes. "Eleanor, at last!" Lady Agnes exclaimed, fluttering a sheet of paper at her. "Do you know how many inquiries have arrived this morning? It seems half of London has suddenly remembered you exist." "I suppose watching a duke dance with the household ghost was quite the entertainment," Eleanor replied dryly. Her mother's fans snapped shut. "Do not call yourself that." "What? A ghost? What would you call me, Mama?" Lady Agnes hesitated, pain flickering across her features. "I would call you my daughter, who has been treated most unfairly by fate, and who may at last have caught its attention again." Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but the butler appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully composed. "Your ladyship," he announced, "His Grace the Duke of Ashbourne." The room seemed to shrink around the name. Eleanor's heart stumbled, then raced ahead as if trying to escape. Lady Agnes surged to her feet, eyes wide. The Duke," she repeated as if she had misheard. "Yes, my lady. He asks if you are at home." Lady Agnes pressed a hand to her throat, then snapped into action. "Of course we are at home. Show him in at once. No, wait. Eleanor, sit there. The light is better. Try not to look so startled, and for heaven's sake, smile." Eleanor barely had time to compose her features before the Duke entered. If he had appeared impossibly polished in the candlelight, he was no less striking in daylight. The sober charcoal of his coat set off the crisp white of his cravat, and his dark hair looked more unruly now, as if the morning wind had dared to touch what no one else would. His gaze swept the room once, quick and assessing, before settling on her. "Lady Agnes, Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing with impeccable formality. "Thank you for receiving me." "The honor is entirely ours, Your Grace," Lady Agnes breathed. "Won't you sit? Tea, coffee, something stronger?" "Tea will do, thank you." The faintest hint of amusement touched his eyes at her fluster. Polite phrases floated back and forth. Whether the success of Lady Pennington's ball, the delight of the season so far. Eleanor heard herself answering when addressed, but her attention narrowed to the spaces between words, to the way his gaze slid to her, then away, then back again. At last, as the maid withdrew and the teacups settled on their saucers, the Duke turned to Lady Agnes. "Lady Agnes," he said, "with your permission, there is a matter of some delicacy upon which I would speak to Lady Eleanor privately." Her mother blinked rapidly. Privately?" He inclined his head. "I shall, of course, withdraw immediately if you object, but I assure you my intentions are honorable." The charged pause that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Eleanor felt heat flood her cheeks. Well, Lady Agnes stammered, clutching at propriety with visible effort. "If it is, that is to say, perhaps I might attend to some correspondence in the next room. The door will remain open." "Entirely appropriate," the Duke said smoothly. When her mother had retreated, casting one last anxious look over her shoulder, silence settled between them like an extra presence. Eleanor set down her cup with care. "You have caused quite the stir, Your Grace." "It was unavoidable, I'm afraid," he replied. "I am accustomed to causing a stir merely by existing. This time, at least, I should like it to be for a purpose." "A purpose," she repeated. "And what purpose could possibly lead you here to this house to speak to a woman like me privately?" He studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "A woman like you," he said slowly, "deserves an explanation, and perhaps an apology, though it is not truly mine to give." Her throat tightened. "I do not understand." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms upon his knees. The movement brought him closer, his voice lower, more intimate. "You asked me last night," he said, "why your name had crossed my path before. I told you that you had a right to know." Eleanor's fingers curled in her lap, twisting her handkerchief. "Yes," she whispered. He held her gaze. "I knew the man who broke your engagement, Lady Eleanor. Henry Lambert." The name struck her like a blow. The room, the chairs, the floral wallpaper, all receded for a heartbeat, leaving only that single undeniable syllable. "Henry," she said, the word tasting of old humiliation and something that still hurt too much to name. "You knew him?" "We were at Oxford together," the Duke replied, "and later we served in the same regiment for a time. I considered him a friend." "Then you know," she said bitterly, "what he thought of me in the end." His jaw tightened. "I know what he claimed, and I know he lied." She stared at him. "Lied?" "Lied," he repeated firmly. "About you, about why he ended the engagement, about many things." She shook her head. "Why should I believe that? Men lie for each other all the time, do they not? It costs you very little to speak kindly of the dead. It would cost me very little to do nothing at all," he countered quietly, "to leave you to your fate, as so many others have done. But I did not come here for platitudes, lady." "Eleanor!" His hand went to the inside pocket of his coat. When he withdrew it, he held a folded, time-yellowed envelope. Her name was written across the front in a hand she recognized instantly, though she had not seen it in almost a decade. Lady Eleanor Whitford. Her breath left her in a rush. "That letter," the Duke said, his voice low, "was found among Henry Lambert's papers after his death. It was never sent. It should have been yours 10 years ago." He extended it toward her. "And I think," he added, as her trembling fingers reached out, "that once you read what he confessed, nothing in your past, or mine, will look quite the same again." For a moment, Eleanor could not seem to make her fingers obey her. The envelope lay in her hand like something poisonous, light as paper and heavy as a stone, dragged up from the bottom of a dark lake. Her name stared back at her in Henry's. Familiar script. 10 years vanished in an instant. She was 19 again, waiting for letters that never came, pretending not to notice when her mother's eyes avoided hers at breakfast, when whispers swelled just beyond closed doors. "Would you prefer that I leave you to it?" the Duke asked quietly. She swallowed. "No," she said, surprising herself. "If this is some cruel jest, I would rather know it in the presence of the man who brought it." His jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. "As you wish." Carefully, Eleanor broke the seal. The paper crackled faintly as she unfolded it. The scent of old ink rose faintly, or perhaps that was only memory. The first line blurred. She blinked hard. "My dearest Eleanor," she read. He spoke of cowardice, of shame, of nights spent gambling in smoke-filled rooms until he owed more than he could ever hope to pay, of a powerful creditor who had watched in silence as the debt mounted, a creditor who happened to be the Duke of Ashbourne's father. He wrote of being summoned to a private meeting, of being offered a lifeline and a noose. A wealthy heiress, Miss Charlotte Fairchild, whose fortune would not only erase his debts, but tie him securely to the right connections. All Henry had to do was end his engagement to the impoverished Lady Eleanor Whitford and agree to the match arranged. For him, he had refused at first. He wrote of her, Eleanor, as sunlight in a life that had already begun to slide into shadow. He wrote of her kindness, her laughter, her stubborn sense of right and wrong. Then came the ultimatum: marry the heiress, or face ruin that would touch not only him, but his family, his younger sisters, his mother. The creditor would not remain discreet forever. I was not noble, he wrote. I did not stand and fight. I let them frighten me with the prospect of dragging you into a life of disgrace and poverty. I told myself I was sparing you, and then, worst of all, I lied. He confessed to telling people that he had discovered unsuitable behavior on her part, that she was not the pure, perfect lady he had thought. It was an easier story, he wrote. It made him seem the injured party, rather than the weak man who bartered love for money. I have wronged you beyond forgiveness. If this letter reaches you, know only that I never ceased to think of you with admiration, and that every comfort I have enjoyed since has tasted of ashes. The letter ended abruptly, the last lines cramped, as if written in haste. There was no signature flourish, only his first name, scrawled as though he had been called away. Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred, until Henry's confession dissolved into a wash of ink and pain. Her hand trembled. She folded the letter carefully, mechanically, as if afraid that if she moved too quickly it would disintegrate and she would lose even this bitter scrap of truth. The silence in the room rang in her ears. At what point, she asked, her voice raw, does a man become more than his excuses? Ashbourne's gaze was steady. I do not offer his excuses, he said, only his truth, late and insufficient as it is. She laughed. Once a sharp, broken sound. His truth, which he never had the courage to send. Yes, the Duke's eyes darkened. For that, I condemn him as much as you do. Eleanor rose, pacing to the window, because sitting still felt impossible. Outside, the bare branches of the garden trees scratched against a grey sky. The world looked unchanged, and yet everything in her felt rearranged, as if some foundational stone had just been yanked free. All these years, she whispered, I thought it must be my fault, that I had failed some invisible test, that there was something wrong with me that everyone else could see. There was nothing wrong with you, he said quietly. She turned, anger flashing through the pain. How can you be so certain, Your Grace? You did not know me then. He hesitated. No, he said slowly, but I knew Henry. I knew his weaknesses. I knew the kind of man my father could be. When he scented advantage, something in his tone made her still. What do you mean? She asked. He looked at his gloved hands for a moment, as if the answer might be written there. When he raised his head, there was no distance in his expression, only a stark, almost brutal honesty. I was there the night he lost the first of those debts, he said. I brought him to that table. I thought it harmless. Young men amusing themselves. I laughed when he kept playing. I did not see or would not see how deep he was sinking. Eleanor's stomach clenched. And my father, he continued, his voice low, was a man who understood that desperation makes people malleable. Once he realized Henry's connection to you and your family's circumstances, he saw an opportunity, a way to tie himself to new money through Miss Fairchild, while quietly destroying a match he thought beneath you both. Beneath, she broke off, horror dawning. You knew, your family knew who I was, what I was to Henry, and still, he nodded once. Yes, I did nothing to stop it. I told myself it was not my concern. I was young, angry with my father for a dozen other reasons, and I let this become one more thing I refused to look at too closely. She stared at him, feeling as if she had been flayed open. So, I was not merely unfortunate, she said slowly. I was targeted. Collateral, he corrected quietly. To men like my father, people are pieces on a board. You, Henry, even Miss Fairchild. I did not realize how thoroughly he had broken you until I returned from the war and saw what your name had become in society. He drew a breath, the sound roughened. When he died, I inherited his title, his estates, and his papers. I found Henry's letter among them. The more I read, the less I could sleep. So you came to ease your conscience, she said. The words were not entirely fair, and she knew it, but the old wound and the new truth scraped harshly against each other. I came, he replied, because I have spent years benefiting from the power that destroyed you, and because doing nothing again was no longer an option I could live with. She pressed a hand to her temples. What do you expect of me then? Tears, gratitude. I cannot reclaim my youth. I cannot reclaim the years I spent as a story people whispered about when they thought I could not hear. No, he said, you cannot, and I do not ask for gratitude. He rose slowly, as if uncertain whether she would bolt. I came first to give you the truth that was stolen from you, he said, and then to ask you something far more difficult. She met his gaze, wary. And what is that? He held her eyes, a question, and something else, something like resolve, burning there. "To ask," the Duke of Ashbourne said, "whether you would allow me to help you reclaim not your past, but your future." The words hung between them like something tangible. Reclaim your future. Eleanor almost laughed. The sound rose to her throat, sharp and incredulous, but she swallowed it back down. Her fingers tightened around Henry's letter, crumpling the paper slightly. "You make it sound very simple, Your Grace," she said, "as if my future were a trinket that merely rolled under a chair and waited to be retrieved." "Nothing about this is simple," he replied. "If it were, I should have done it years ago." She looked at him, really looked at him, not as the glittering, untouchable duke who had stepped into the ballroom as if the world were his, but as the man in front of her now, shoulders held a little too straight, jaw tense, eyes shadowed by something that looked very much like regret. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "You have given me a letter and a truth, painful but valuable. Beyond that, what do you imagine you can do that will not only stir the gossip further?" His gaze did not waver. "First," he said, "I can make it known that Henry's claims about you were false, that he lied out of cowardice, not out of wounded honor." She stiffened. "You would expose him. He is dead. And you," he said quietly, "are not." The tenderness in those words startled her more than any declaration would have. Still, she shook her head. "To clear my name by blackening his," her mouth twisted. "Society loves such spectacles. They will not say, 'Poor Lady Eleanor, wronged at last made right.' They will say, 'How convenient that the dead man is saddled with all the blame.' No, I will not dance on his grave to reclaim my reputation." A flicker of respect crossed his features. "I expected as much," he said. "There is another possibility." "Which is?" He drew a breath, as if the next words weighed more than the title he carried. "I can choose you," he said simply. The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor stared at him, caught between disbelief and anger. "Choose me," she repeated. "What does that even mean?" "In the only way that matters to a world like ours," he answered. "Openly, publicly, as a man chooses the woman he wishes to court, to marry." Silence crashed down around them. Somewhere in the next room a clock ticked far too loudly. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I am." She laughed then, but there was no mirth in it. "This is your grand act of atonement. You will sacrifice yourself upon the altar of the old spinster's ruined prospects." His eyes flashed. "Do you truly think so little of yourself, or so little of me?" "I think," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "that men with power often mistake gestures for justice. You marry the poor, damaged lady, and the story becomes one of your generosity. The Duke so noble, he took pity on the woman no one else wanted. And what if," he asked, "the story were different?" She frowned. "Different how?" "What if," he said slowly, "people whispered instead that the proud, aloof Duke of Ashbourne, who has refused, every simpering debutante thrust beneath his nose these last years, lost his composure over a woman the world had already dismissed? What if I made it clear that my interest in you is not a charity, but a preference?" The word lodged somewhere deep. Preference. She shook her head again, pacing away. The room felt too small. "You do not know me," she said. "You know a letter. You know your father's sins. You know your guilt. That is not the same as knowing me." "You are wrong," he said calmly. "I know more than you think. I know you have refused at least 2 offers since your broken engagement, safe offers, if not grand ones. I know you visit the orphanage in St. Jude's parish twice a week, and that you have been quietly paying the school fees for the gardener's daughter from your pin money. I know you left a ball early last month claiming a headache, when in truth you sat in the retiring room with a frightened girl whose reputation would have been torn to shreds if you had not intervened." Heat flooded her face. "Have you been spying on me, Your Grace?" "I have been listening," he corrected. "Watching, deciding whether the woman I remembered in Henry's letters existed beyond his guilty conscience." "His letters," she repeated, startled. "There were more." "A few," he admitted, "half-finished, never sent. He wrote of you more than he wrote of anything else. You have haunted my thoughts longer than you realize, Lady Eleanor." The confession sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself. "Even if I believed you," she said quietly, "you ask a great deal. To step into the light again on your arm after so many years in the shadows, to invite a new storm of talk." "Yes," he said simply, "I ask a great deal. I will not pretend otherwise, but I offer much in return." "Your name," she said bitterly. "Your rank." "My name," he agreed. "My rank, my protection, my resources, but more than that, my partnership. I cannot undo what was done to you." but I can stand beside you as you decide who you wish to be now, when no one else's choices are steering your life." The word partnership slipped past her defenses, landing in some quiet, hungry place. He rose. "I will not press you for an answer today. Think on it. If you cannot endure the notion of attaching yourself to the man whose father destroyed your reputation, I will accept that. But I will not withdraw the truth I have given you, nor my wish to help." He bowed, the line of his shoulders taut. "When next we meet, you may tell me if you will allow me to call on you again." "Your Grace," she began, not even certain what she meant to say. But at that moment, footsteps sounded in the hall. Lady Agnes reappeared, cheeks pink with poorly concealed curiosity. "I trust all is well?" she asked, eyes darting between them. The Duke straightened, the careful mask of polite society sliding back into place. "Perfectly, Lady Agnes," he said smoothly. "I have taken up enough of your morning. Thank you for your hospitality." They exchanged farewells. Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze on her as he left. Felt something wordless pass between them in that last brief look. Only when the door closed did her mother round on her, hands pressed to her chest. "Eleanor," Lady Agnes whispered, almost afraid to speak the hope aloud. "Tell me, what did he say? What does he intend?" Eleanor opened her mouth, and then, from somewhere outside, rising clear and shrill above the rattle of carriage wheels, came the unmistakable sound of a woman's voice, furious and breaking. "I will not go in there," it cried. "I will not face her. She ruined everything, don't you see? She took him from me." Eleanor froze, blood turning to ice, because the voice belonged to a name she had not heard in years. Miss Charlotte Fairchild. For a moment Eleanor thought she had imagined it. That desperate voice carried in fragments through the glass, but Lady Agnes had gone pale, her hand flying to her throat. "Who on earth? Her?" Mother began, hurrying to the window. Eleanor was already there, fingers clutching the curtain as she peered down into the narrow street. A carriage stood before the house, its glossy black sides spattered with mud from the early spring rains. A footman hovered by the open door, torn between duty and self-preservation. Beside him on the pavement, a lady in a dove-grey cloak twisted against the restraining hand of an older woman. "I will not go." "In there!" the younger woman cried again, voice breaking. "You cannot make me face her. She ruined everything, don't you see? She took him from me." The older woman murmured something, clearly mortified by the volume. "Charlotte," Lady Agnes breathed at Eleanor's side. "Good heavens, Miss Fairchild." As if she had felt the weight of her name, Miss Charlotte Fairchild looked up. Her gaze met Eleanor's through the glass, wild, shimmering with fury, and something like panic. For an instant time folded, and they were two younger women again across a ballroom, one newly engaged to Henry Lambert, the other already fading from the center of the room. The footman glanced up too, saw the watching figures. Duty overruled hesitation. With a resigned expression, he stepped back, and the older woman, Charlotte's aunt, if Eleanor remembered correctly, gently but firmly propelled her charge toward the front steps. "Eleanor," Lady Agnes said faintly, "we cannot pretend we are not at home." "No," Eleanor whispered. Her heart thudded. "We cannot." They had barely returned to the center of the drawing room when the butler appeared, looking more flustered than she had seen him in years. "Miss Fairchild and Mrs. Denby, my ladies," he announced. Charlotte swept in first, her cloak falling open to reveal a gown of pale green silk, exquisitely tailored, and all wrong for the hour. The color did nothing for the ashen cast of her face. Her dark hair, usually arranged with perfect precision, had loosed a few glossy strands around her temples. She looked like a portrait come to life and then cracked down the middle. "Lady Agnes," Mrs. Denby said quickly, bobbing a bow, "forgive this intrusion. My niece insisted upon—" "I insisted," Charlotte cut in, her eyes never leaving Eleanor, "because I will not sit in my drawing room and listen to the street talk about the Duke of Ashbourne visiting Lady Eleanor Whitford without coming to see for myself." The use of Eleanor's full name was a weapon. Lady Agnes stiffened. "Miss Fairchild, this is most irregular." "Irregular?" Charlotte gave a short, ragged laugh. "Oh, my lady, you do not know the meaning of the word." Her gaze flicked to Henry's letter, still clutched in Eleanor's hand. Colour flared high in Charlotte's cheeks. "So," she said hoarsely, "he has shown you something, has he? How generous of his grace, how very, very generous." "Miss Fairchild," Eleanor said carefully, "perhaps you should sit down. You seem—" "Do not speak to me as if I were hysterical," Charlotte snapped. "I have been perfectly rational for 10 years, Lady Eleanor, while the ghost of you walked through my marriage." The room tightened around them. Lady Agnes glanced helplessly at Mrs. Denby, who looked as if she wished the floor would open and swallow them whole. Eleanor drew a slow breath. "What is it you wish of me?" "I wish—" Charlotte's voice cracked. She pressed a hand against her ribs, as if steadying something that hurt. I wish to know why you must have them both. Them both? Eleanor repeated, bewildered. Henry, Charlotte whispered, and now Ashbourne. The name hung in the air like smoke. I had neither, Eleanor said quietly. Henry chose you. Ashbourne has chosen nothing. We have exchanged conversation, nothing more. Charlotte's laugh was sharp and brittle. Is that what he told you? That this is all some noble act? A rescue of the poor, wronged lady? Her eyes gleamed. Did he show you the letter addressed to you, or only the one addressed to no one at all? Eleanor's fingers tightened around the paper. There was only one. It explained how your engagement came about, how he lied about me. Oh yes, Charlotte said. His great confession. I found it among his things after he died. I burned it. Eleanor flinched. But there was another, Charlotte continued, stepping closer. Her hands shook as she reached into her reticule. The one he wrote later, the one he begged Ashbourne to deliver. She drew out a second, folded sheet, worn at the edges. The crease lines softened by many readings. Eleanor's heart lurched when she saw her own name on the front again. Lady Eleanor Whitford. This, Charlotte said, her voice low and trembling, was entrusted to the Duke of Ashbourne 8 years ago. Henry pressed it into his hand before he returned to you all for a season I dreaded. Give this to her, he said. She must know the truth. She looked up, eyes burning. Your Duke accepted it. He never delivered it. He moved through ballrooms and card rooms with that letter in his pocket while I waited at home, wondering why my husband paced at night, murmuring your name. Eleanor's breath caught. Ashbourne never told you, Charlotte finished savagely. Of course he did not. Why spoil a perfectly tragic story now when he can play the savior, when he can arrive bearing partial truths and offers of redemption? She took Eleanor's hand without permission and slapped the second letter into it. The paper was warm from her grip. There, Charlotte said hoarsely, your future, your past, whichever you prefer. Read it, and then ask yourself whether you can stomach binding your life to a man who chose silence when it might have saved you years of humiliation. Miss Fairchild, Lady Agnes cried, scandalized, this is unforgivable. Is it? Charlotte asked, suddenly very tired. Forgive me then, my lady. I have borne my share of unforgivable things. Her shoulders sagged. For a heartbeat, Eleanor glimpsed not the furious intruder, but a woman who had been 19 too once, promised a story very different from the one she received. Mrs. Denby stepped forward, taking her niece's arm. We should go, Charlotte. Charlotte allowed herself to be turned toward the door. At the threshold, she looked back. I did not come to fight you, she said to Eleanor, her voice frayed. Only to warn you, men like the late Duke leave wreckage behind. It seems his son is trying to build monuments out of it. The door closed behind her, the echo loud in the heavy silence. Eleanor stood very still in the center of the room, 2 letters pressing against her palm like twin weights from another life. One discovered among a dead man's papers by a son seeking absolution, the other withheld for years by that same son, if Charlotte spoke true. Eleanor, Lady Agnes whispered, reaching for her. My dear girl. But Eleanor barely heard her. The ink on the second envelope swam before her eyes. A knock sounded again, sharp, urgent, at the front door below. She looked toward the drawing-room entrance, pulse hammering, as the butler's voice floated up the hall. Your Grace, he said, you have returned so soon. For an instant, Eleanor thought her heart had stopped altogether. The butler's words seemed to hang in the air like dust motes. Your Grace, you have returned so soon. Lady Agnes turned to her, eyes wide. He must not come in now, she hissed. Not when you look as if you have seen a ghost. Eleanor, compose yourself, child. It is too late, Eleanor murmured. Footsteps, brisk and sure, came down the hallway. She had just enough time to slide one letter, Henry's first confession, into her pocket. The second remained in her hand, its edges biting into her palm. The door opened. The Duke of Ashbourne stepped inside, bringing with him a faint chill of damp air and the subtle tang of the street. His gaze went first to Lady Agnes, already rising in flustered greeting, then to Eleanor. He stopped. Whatever polite remark he had prepared died on his tongue. His eyes took in her pallor, the rigidity of her posture, the crumpled paper in her hand. He noticed the lingering tremor in the curtains, the way the room crackled with something unnamed. Lady Agnes, he said slowly. Lady Eleanor, forgive the imposition. I realized after leaving that there was more I ought to have said. How very diligent, Eleanor replied, surprised by the calm in her own voice. It rang like glass. You are not the only visitor we have received since your departure, Your Grace. His gaze sharpened. I saw Miss Fairchild's carriage as I turned into the street, he admitted. I had wondered. His eyes flicked to the envelope in her hand. I see I no longer need to wonder. Lady Agnes looked between them, alarm deepening. Perhaps I should see to the tea, she said weakly. Or stay, Mamma, Eleanor said, not taking her eyes from the Duke. You may hear what you will, There is very little left in my life that society has not already dissected at supper tables. The Duke's jaw tightened. If this concerns matters that should remain private, private. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the paper. Nothing in this affair has been private for years, Your Grace. Not my humiliation, not my supposed disgrace. Why should the truth be treated with more delicacy than the lie? Eleanor, Lady Agnes whispered, but she sank back onto the sofa, white-knuckled. The Duke stepped closer, every line of him carefully controlled. Only his eyes betrayed him, they burned. What has Miss Fairchild told you? He asked quietly. That you have a talent, Eleanor said, for carrying other people's confessions. She held up the second envelope so that he could see her name written there. Henry wrote this one too, did he not? She said. He pressed it into your hand and begged you to deliver it. You accepted, and then you did nothing. He closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a blow he had anticipated all morning. I see, he murmured. She gave it to you. She did, Eleanor said, with some vigor. He opened his eyes again. May I ask, he said, with a composure she did not entirely believe, whether you have read it yet? No, the word was clipped. I thought I might allow you the courtesy of speaking first, since you seem so fond of arriving with explanations. Something that might have been pain flared across his features and vanished. I deserved that, he said. Very well. He did not ask to sit. He stood before her as a man might stand before a magistrate. There were 2 letters, he began. The one I showed you earlier, found among Henry's papers after his death, and this one. His gaze dropped briefly to the envelope in her hand. The one he gave me 8 years ago when he feared he would see you again and could not trust himself to speak. You told me, Eleanor said, that the first had never been sent. You did not say the second had never been delivered. No, he agreed. I did not. That omission is mine, and I will not pretend it harmless. Why? The word tore out of her. Why take it if you meant to do nothing? Why carry my name around in your pocket while I stumbled through rooms full of people who believed the worst of me? He flinched. Because, he said slowly, when he gave it to me, I did not trust him. Henry was volatile. He had already broken you once. He spoke of seeing you again with a fever in his eyes I did not like. I feared whatever he said in that letter would drag you back into a web you had barely escaped. That was not your decision to make, Eleanor said, the tremor in her hands finally reaching her voice. You do not get to decide what truths a woman may bear. That is the same arrogance that destroyed my engagement in the first place. You are right, he said simply. The admission stunned her for a heartbeat. I was arrogant, he continued. I was my father's son, more than I cared to admit. I told myself I was protecting you, protecting Miss Fairchild, sparing everyone further pain. In truth, I was also cowardly. I did not want to wade into the wreckage we had all created, so I put the letter away. I told myself I would deliver it when the time was right. The time, of course, never was. And then he died, Eleanor said. And then he died, Ashbourne agreed, voice roughened. By the time I understood how thoroughly my father's machinations had ruined you both, the choice I had stolen from you could not be returned. I read that letter. I read his other drafts. I saw the shape of what he had done and what I had allowed. Silence pressed in. Lady Agnes had a handkerchief pressed to her mouth, eyes shining. So you kept it, Eleanor said, and now you bring me another letter, another confession, as if quantity might make up for timing. He drew a breath. I went to Mrs. Lambert, Mrs. Fairchild, 2 years ago, he said quietly. I told her of the letter I had failed to deliver. She demanded to see it. I gave it to her. She chose, for reasons of her own, to keep it. A humorless smile touched his mouth. I cannot blame her for how she has used it today. Eleanor looked down at the second envelope. It sat small and absurd in her hand, yet everything seemed to orbit around it. You said earlier, she murmured, that you wished to help me reclaim my future. I did, he said. I still do. How? She asked, lifting her gaze to his. Can I possibly step into any future with you when my past lies in tatters between us, stained by your silence? His eyes met hers, naked for the first time since she had known him. The armor dropped. What remained was not the impenetrable Duke, but a man standing on the edge of something that terrified him. Because, he said, voice low, my silence then was the greatest failure of my life, and my speaking now is the only way I know to atone, not with grand gestures, but with the truth, however ugly, about Henry, about my father, about myself. He took one step closer, then another, until he was near enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow of a sleepless night. And if you must know the ugliest truth of all, Lady Eleanor, he said, it is this. I did not bring that letter before because somewhere along the years of watching you endure what we had done, of reading words he wrote about you, of seeing the woman you became despite everything, and I stopped being merely a guilty bystander. His throat worked. I fell in love with you, the Duke of Ashbourne said quietly, long before I had any right to speak of it. The room seemed to tilt around her. The letters crinkled in Eleanor's hand, and for the first time in 10 years, she was not entirely sure whether the tremor in her chest was made of rage or something far more dangerous. The words he had spoken, about love, about failure, hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp and impossible to ignore. Eleanor's throat felt dry. She looked down at the second letter, still pressed in her hand, the paper faintly damp from her grip. "Whether you love me or not," she said at last, each word deliberate, "does not erase what you did or did not do." "I know," Ashbourne answered. There was no defense in his voice now, only a quiet weariness. "I have no right to your forgiveness, only to your honest judgment." "Then allow me at least the courtesy," she said, "of reading the words you chose to keep from me before I pass that judgment." He inclined his head. "Of course." She glanced at her mother, who still watched them with stricken eyes. "Mamma," Eleanor said softly, "would you mind?" Lady Agnes drew in a shaky breath and rose. "I shall be in the next room," she said. "If you require me, call. If you do, not. Decide wisely, my love." Her footsteps retreated, the door closing with a muted click. Eleanor crossed to the window, needing the pale wash of light. Her fingers shook as she slit the second envelope and unfolded the pages within. The handwriting was Henry's again, but different this time, less careful, more urgent. "Eleanor, I write this because I am, as ever, a coward in your presence. You deserved anger from me when I broke our engagement. Instead, I gave you silence. You deserved explanations. Instead, I gave you lies. Now I find I cannot meet your eyes in any ballroom without choking on what I have done, and still I lack the courage to ask you to hear it from my own lips. Ashbourne has agreed to deliver this to you if I fail myself yet again." She read on. He spoke of Charlotte, not as the villain Eleanor had sometimes imagined in her darkest nights, but as a woman who had been promised a man already half in love with a ghost. He wrote of his shame at bringing his old betrayal into his marriage, of the nights Charlotte had woken to find him sitting before the fire, their marriage certificate in one hand and Eleanor's memory in the other. He did not excuse himself. He did not ask for absolution. He begged only that Eleanor not waste her life in the same prison of what if that had begun to consume his. "If you never forgive me, I will understand," he wrote. "If you never wish to see me again, I will count it justice. But do not, I beg you, let the story of Henry Lambert be the last chapter of your heart. There is more in you than one man's weakness." Near the end, one line stood stark. "If there is any man I would trust to walk beside you, it would be the one who has seen me at my worst and despised it, the Duke of Ashbourne. He sees more than most. If he ever looks at you as I once did, know that it is the one wise thing I have done, to send him toward you." The letter trailed off, the ink smudged as if the pen had been snatched away, or tears had fallen there. There was no signature this time. It did not need one. Eleanor closed her eyes. When she opened them, Ashbourne was still where she had left him, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on her face with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "So," she said quietly, "you were meant to bring me not only his confession, but his blessing." "I was," he replied, "and I failed, spectacularly." She let out a faint, humorless huff. "You certainly have a talent for dramatic failures, Your Grace." "Regrettably," he agreed. She looked down at both letters now, one in each hand. The girl she had been at 19 seemed to stand between them, hopeful and bright, and utterly unprepared for the ways in which men's choices could carve scars into her life. "I spent 10 years," she said slowly, "believing I was unworthy, that something in me had caused all of this. I twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes just to fit inside other people's stories about me." A faint, incredulous smile touched her mouth. "How foolish of me," she whispered, "to give so much power away." Ashbourne took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid of breaking whatever fragile understanding was forming. "Eleanor," he said softly. She looked up. There was anger still in her, yes, and grief, and the ache of time lost. But beneath all of that, something else stirred, something stubborn and tired of being dictated to by the past. "I do not forgive you, not all at once," she said. "Nor Henry, nor your father. Some wounds do not vanish because truth is finally spoken over them. They must be lived with day by day." His jaw clenched. "I would not ask you to pretend otherwise. But," she went on, surprising herself, "I am also so very tired of letting what was done to me be the only thing anyone sees when they look my way, including myself." Silence expanded between them, gentle this time. "You asked," she said, "whether I would allow you to help me reclaim my future. I did, he said, though even that sounds presumptuous now. Everything about you is a little presumptuous, Your Grace, she said, and he almost smiled. Still, if I refuse you outright, what am I saying? That my fear matters more than any chance at something different? She took a breath that seemed to reach all the way down to the frightened girl she'd once been. I will not marry you as an act of charity on either side, she said firmly. Not as penance, not as spectacle. If I say yes, it will not be because you are a duke who can silence gossip, or because Henry thought you might be worthy of me, or because society has suddenly remembered I exist. Her voice steadied. If I say yes, it will be because I choose you, as the flawed, stubborn, infuriatingly honest man who has finally learned that women are not pieces on a board, and because you choose me, not as a symbol of redemption, but as the woman I have become. His breath left him in a rush. Then, he asked, barely above a whisper, may I have a chance to earn such a yes? She studied him for a long moment, the vulnerability beneath his control, the haunted shadows in his eyes, the way he stood as if ready to accept whatever blow she dealt. Call on me, she said at last, properly, publicly. Allow people to talk. Allow them to see that I am not hiding in corners anymore. Walk with me in the park where everyone can stare. Dance with me at the next ball. Let us see what grows in the daylight, Your Grace. A slow, almost disbelieving smile softened his features. Then I shall become the most scandalously consistent visitor in all of London, he said. Until you either send me away or do me the honor of making my house your home. We shall see, she replied. But weeks later, when he stood before her in a quieter room, without witnesses, and asked again, with no title in his mouth, only her name, Eleanor found that her answer had settled in her long before. Yes, she said, her voice steady, her heart no longer bound to a 19-year-old's broken dream, not to rescue me, to walk beside me. And when they stepped into another ballroom months later, his arm firm beneath her hand, the whispers rose again. Oh, they did. But this time, Eleanor lifted her chin, let them talk, and turned her face toward the man who looked at her as if she had never been invisible at all. For the first time in 10 years, the word that rang in her ears was not spinster. It was simply chosen, and this time she had chosen in return. Sometimes life teaches us to disappear long before the world has finished with us. You may know that feeling of sitting at the edge of the room while others dance, believing you are somehow too late, too old, too damaged to step forward again. Eleanor's story reminds us that the worst thing done to you is not the truest thing about you. There is still love, dignity, and choice on the other side of betrayal. And sometimes the most radical act is not forgiveness. It is daring to choose a future where you are no longer defined by someone else's weakness.